Another year of competitive Yu-Gi-Oh! Comes to a close, and preparation for the year to come is already underway. Normally, we'd look to the OCG, as well as the next big card product, and try to predict and distill the best tech pick for the meta to come. But this time, Konami's thrown us a bit of a curveball. Sure, TCG exclusive cards are nothing new, but now, 3 cards of such unmitigated potential have arrived, and now all eyes are on the Gold Sarcophagus Megaton for what they will bring to the table and what they'll do to shape the future of competition. It's no secret that Nibiru, the Primal Being, Dimension Shifter, and Dark Ruler No More are going to have a significant showing in the months to come. And sure, if your goal is to go second and punish combo decks with these new releases, you certainly could do worse than jamming 3 of each into your deck. But not all of them are fitted to support or hinder every strategy. And that's what today's video is all about. Identifying which of these new additions are most effective against which strategy, as well as which decks are most primed to use those cards. Let's start with the most popular one, Nibiru, the Primal Being. Now, easily this card is the most powerful of the bunch. Spoilers, but Dimension Shifter feels like it'll have kind of a Max C vibe to it. Your opponent will just stop what they're doing to conserve resources, and Dark Ruler requires you to have a good follow-up play to take full advantage of it. Nibiru, on the other hand, offers direct removal of your opponent's monsters in one of the most efficient ways we've ever seen. But it's also the easiest to play around. I don't think it's too far-fetched to predict that over the next year of deck profiles, we're going to be having sections dedicated to the best combos you can do that don't threaten a Nibiru wipe. So when the meta develops, this will put the ominous rock in an interesting crossroads. It'll be absolutely amazing against sloppy play sequencing and decks that can't manage to be threatening without a massive special summons. But it's going to weigh you down when you duel opponents who can maintain a strong board presence while playing conservatively. Remember, even if you go second, if your opponent plays a modest board that doesn't let you drop the rock, and they still have cards in hand, they can just as easily Nibiru you if you get careless. Not to mention, this is going to be a horrible card to pick up in the draw phase. While it's more effective at ending turns than Ash is, there are going to be a lot of the same drawbacks. Your opponent combos off, and the 6th card you needed to break the board was a hand trap that was too late. With that in mind, let's check out the matchups. When looking at the top decks, or at least the decks that were the cream of the crop before the latest ban list, we've got 4 choices. Salamangreat, Sky Striker, Thunder Dragons of various persuasions, and Orchist of slightly fewer but still various persuasions. Nibiru is good against 3 of these 4 decks. Admittedly, Sky Striker is the most slippery of the bunch. As I understand it, you summon Rei, and then go into Kaine, gain some life points, then go into Kagari to recycle and engage, and then lastly Shizuku to grab a Widow Anchor. This puts them just under the 5 needed to summon Nibiru, and then give them a token to turn off all their spell cards. But the other 3 decks need 5 summons just to get their engines going, never mind field their boss monsters. Like, Agripane and Elpie imply 3 more summons before them. The first Galatea is usually the 5 summon mark for Orchist, and with Reincarnation Link summoning, Salamangreat will hit 5 summons before you even fan out your cards and see that you have a Nibiru. Now, Orchist and Salamangreat have some wonderful interruptions themselves, but they usually need a turn to start up because A, they're trap cards, and B, you need to have a Link monster to activate them, which they're not going to have because you've traded them out for the big rock token. And there aren't a lot of decks that wouldn't run this card either. Burning Abyss and Striker are the only decks I can think of that wouldn't really want it, but in everything else it's insane. Even if the 3000 attack doesn't sell you, having to only fight a maybe giant token while having some extra Link material to use for your own plays kind of seals the deal. If you can OTK, you'll want to play Nibiru, especially because it has diminishing returns the more monsters you have invested on your side of the field. And thankfully, 3000 of the work is already done for you. You've just got to find the other 5000 in 4 summons. The need to capitalize on this effect makes Nibiru much like Dark Ruler No More, but there are slight differences. First being, you can't chain monster effects to Dark Ruler. Nibiru could potentially be blanked if your opponent manages to field a monster that negates monster effects, or effects in general, but it won't have any power against Dark Ruler. Also, unlike Nibiru, Dark Ruler is good if it's in your opening hand or your 6th card. It's also a lot harder to play around. Meteor Man has a condition that can be avoided if you play smart, but this sizzling spell can be slammed down at a moment's notice, and if your opponent lacks any non-monster based negation, you're going to run roughshod over them. Also, it slots effortlessly into just about any deck. If you're worried about a bunch of big monsters keeping you from playing Yu-Gi-Oh! And let's face it, it happens from time to time, Dark Ruler is going to be a godsend. Not being able to do damage is a small price to pay for the opportunity to take back the tempo of the duel. And we're going to see this a lot in rogue decks. I found that a lot of these kinds of decks aren't bad because their power level is low, but rather their ability to play through negates is less developed than higher tier decks. They have either common abilities with the meta that are already solved for in competition, or they have easily identifiable choke points that keep them from finalizing their game plan. I won't be surprised if we see a slew of rogue decks take top spots because they can search as they please without being hindered by Colossus or having keycards negated by Spicy Boy Archfiend. Unfortunately, that's about where the good ends here. Dark Ruler No More was built as a way to encourage people to play more trap cards to keep their monsters from being savaged. But it's not that people aren't playing trap cards, it's that the ones that are worth playing are highly searchable, meaning you don't have to clog your deck with multiples. Let's take a look at the previous list of meta decks. Orcust would definitely hate to lose Ningirsu's protection, but they probably searched Orcust Crescendo already, and I can't think of a better bait for that than a skill drain on a spell. Salamangreat are even worse, because their threats aren't monsters, at least not on your turn. They might even let it resolve so that they don't waste their roar, and the same could be said for Striker. Thunder Dragon variants are probably the only deck out of the 4 that get slapped by this card enough to be worth it, and that's if running triple Solemn Judgment doesn't become a thing. And that's kind of the trade-off, isn't it? Dark Ruler can still be played, even if you draw it as card 6, but Nibiru is far less liable to be negated. It's an important distinction to keep in mind. Understanding the subtle differences between the two is going to be paramount during your time deck building, and it will reward those who keep a wise and vigilant eye towards the kind of competitive environment that's developing. Dimension Shifter, on the other hand, works on a different axis than the other two, so it's hard to draw a direct comparison. While the last two are meant to deal with boards that have been established in one way or another, Dimension Shifter is all about turning off one of the game's most powerful resource zones, the graveyard. I mean, let's face it, it's hard to imagine just about any deck nowadays not using the graveyard for something. You can't banish Orcusts out of your grave if they were never there to begin with. Salamangreats can't grab cards out of there either, same with multi-roll, and while a lot of effects activate when they're banished, the Thunder Dragons are just as reliant on the grave for a wide variety of their plays and non-Thunder Dragon cards. Even outside of those, we've got Burning Abyss, Shaddolls, Madolche, Fluffle, Zombies, Marincess, Chaos Monsters, take your pick. Any deck that uses the graveyard at all is going to feel the heat, and since it extends all the way through both players' turns, then I've got to ask, who is this card for? I mean, you can play this in response to an effect like Foolish Burial, and then the card that was supposed to go to the grave is just banished now, but then your opponent will likely just stop their turn, and now it's your turn to go, and then you do... what? Well, a couple of ideas do come to mind. Frog Paleo might not be the best example, considering that Swap Frog and Ronin Totem both really like using the grave to make Totally Awesome, but it could let you play a lot more Paleo cards. You could set a big threatening back row, end turn, Shifter's effect will shut off, and now your opponent has to set up board against your wall of trap cards. At this point, you can start summoning free Paleo monsters, and you can activate Swap Frog like you just don't care. In fact, you could put some trap tricks into the mix as a better turn 1 normal summon to grab even more traps. In this context, you could conceivably have a situation where it doesn't matter who wins the die roll, as long as you open Dimension Shifter and your opponent isn't in a position to risk committing more cards, then you can play like you won the die roll and even get to have a battle phase. Wasn't that nice? I've seen some videos recently about Gren Maju decks that have been bolstered by the release of Gizmek Orochi, and Shifter is going to be even more integral. Imagine, you activate Dimension Shifter during either you or your opponent's turn, and then every engine card that wouldn't normally get banished now starts adding attack power to Gren Maju. And unless they have an impermanence, they're not going to be able to stop you because Dimension Shifter has the side effect of shutting off all monster hand traps. And let's not forget an archetype that's built around being banished, Metaphys. You can activate Dimension Shifter and then play a whole bunch of cards that start annihilating your opponent's hands, like card destruction or hand destruction. All the while you will draw cards and then you'll just get rid of all the Metaphys that you draw, having them be banished and ready for the next standby phase so you can gain a ton of advantage. But you'll notice that I've had to highlight some interesting cards to really put Dimension Shifter in a good light. I mean, don't get me wrong. I've had my fair share of teeth-grinding defeats versus a well-set-up Frog deck, but Metaphys is a pretty big stretch. Shifter is probably the most fair card out of the three, Sure, you can stop your opponent from playing for the turn, but we keep coming back to the question, what is it that you can do during your turn? Its stun effect is much more of a build around than the other two, and we're likely to see some really creative applications for it, but how far will it go? Also, side note, Shifter is the only one of the three that's vulnerable to Called by the Grave, a card people are already maxing out on to stop other hand traps, and I see no reason not to expect it to be graved on a regular basis. So, time for the wrap up. Nibiru and Dark Ruler No More are, and please laugh at this, evenly matched in what they can accomplish, with combo decks like Thunder Dragon playing Nibiru to uproot opposing big boards, while Striker will be using Dark Ruler No More to a similar effect, while keeping their zones open and, hey look, it's a spell card to count towards Striker effects, ain't that cool? It's hard to say which one will come out on top, but I think it's safe to say that Dimension Shifter will be seeing fringe play compared to the other two. As we look to the future, I wouldn't be surprised if the top deck stayed very good, if not still at the top, just adjusted for the new realities of a world where a memed monarch monster who continues to get the royal shaft can come out of nowhere and blank all of your effects. Striker will still find a way to be relevant, because as long as Hercules base can recycle cards, no amount of limits can really kill the deck. I would also keep an eye out for, well, Evil Eye, but also True Draco. Neither deck is too worried about being hit by Dark Ruler No More, and their summons are few enough to avoid being Nibiru'd while still leveraging threatening board states. And with that, I've completely exhausted my current thoughts on what these new exclusives mean for the game. But what do you all think? There's so much possibility space that can be explored at this point, there's no way that one guy can really capture all of it. Honestly, I'm really curious what kind of decks will crop up. My biggest hope is that older decks that couldn't survive in a faster format get another time in the sun. Personally, I want to play Boojins again, and no, I'm not salty that Fire Fist were the Beast Warrior archetype that got massive support recently. I'm just disappointed. Anyway, thank you all so much for watching. If you want more Nova, please feel free to peruse the description for links to more videos, as well as my Twitter feed. I don't quite have the lock on streaming as I wanted to a little while ago, so that's why you won't see any of that for now. Suffice it to say, I could do with a bit of an upgrade to my hardware. I'm hoping to get a Patreon launched sometime in the future, but for now, I feel like I need to provide a bit more as a content creator before I can justify asking you all to support my growth in that field. But be that as it may, it's been an absolute pleasure having you all as an audience, and I can't wait to reach out to you again. Have a good day, and bye-bye.